Hello, my name is Marcellus. I'm one of the pastors at King's Church in Heathfield. And I want to start by asking you a question. What do you think of Christians? When you hear the word Christian, what does it make you immediately think of? Does it make you think of Ned Flanders in The Simpsons? Or perhaps I'm being too kind. Perhaps it's something far less flattering. Part of the oppressive structure of the state, or part of the white patriarchal system. Perhaps this morning you are a Christian. What do you think about Christians? What do you think a Christian is? Are we just ordinary people who happen to like going to church? Not at the moment. Or are we ordinary people who like praying and reading our Bible and singing? Are we just the same as everyone else with a bit of a weird hobby of prayer and Bible and things like that? What I don't reckon many of us would say is this: Christians have caused trouble all over the world, resisting government laws, social conventions, and sworn allegiance to a different government. And yet that's exactly the way that Christianity is described in Acts 17 by the local residents of a town called Thessalonica in Greece. And so what's happened is that in AD 49, which is within living memory of Jesus' death and resurrection, two early Christian leaders, Paul and Silas, have gone to Thessalonica and they've preached about Jesus. They've preached about him in synagogues and they've preached about him in the town square. Quite a bit like what I'm doing now. And some people have believed in Jesus. And one of the people that's believed in Jesus, his name is Jason, which will become relevant in a minute. But what's happened is that this has stirred up so much anger amongst the Jewish population that a huge riot has broken out, and the mob have searched the town looking for Paul and Silas, presumably to beat them up and put them in prison, because that's what happens in the New Testament. People become Christians, or they talk about Jesus, they get beaten up and put into prison. But the mob this time are unable to find Paul and Silas. So instead, they just grab hold of Jason, became relevant, Jason and all the other believers, and they drag them before the Roman city officials, the guys that are ruling the city, and they accuse them. They accuse them of being Christians. They say, these men have caused trouble all over the world, and now they've come here. And Jason has welcomed them into his house. They are defying Caesar. Caesar's the emperor at the time, the guy who's ruling Thessalonica through his government. They're defying Caesar's decrees, and they're saying that there's another king, one called Jesus. And so what happens next is that Jason and the believers are bailed. They then secretly smuggle Paul and Silas out of Thessalonica to a neighbouring city. And then Paul and Silas go about the rest of their journey. And maybe a year later, Paul writes to the followers of Jesus in Thessalonica. And that's a letter that we've got in the Bible, and that's called 1 Thessalonians, the first letter to the Thessalonians, which is a letter that we are going to look at over the next few months. And we've called this sermon series Living a Different Story. Because that's what Christians, that's what Jesus followers are doing. They're living a different story. They're living a radically different story about life, about sex, about money, about power, about peace, about fulfillment, about everything. And what I want us to get this morning or this afternoon, whenever you're watching it, is I want us to get that Christians live a different story. That's all. Simple. And I'm going to illustrate it by looking at two different things in particular. Number one, we're going to look at happiness. And number two, we're going to look at a better world. We're going to start with happiness because frankly it's easier. Now it's obvious that we live our lives like a story. We live our lives like a storybook. And the ending that we are all hoping for and working towards is they all lived happily ever after. Now that looks different for different people. That looks like a big family for some people, and it looks like being single for others. But we are all working towards that happy ending. And we do it in everything, from the moment that we have some autonomy over our decisions. So we decide we want to be a hairdresser, and we go to college, we become an apprentice in a hairdresser's, we own our own salon, and we do it because we think it will make us happy. If we decide to marry and have a family, we do it because we believe it will make us happy. And a lot of what we believe about what will make us happy is written for us by society and advertising. So we think we might be happy if we had that relationship with that person, or we had that career, or we earned that bit more money, or we had that different experience, or we had that better body. But for Christians, it's a radically different story towards happiness. The things that are meant to make us happy for Christians are very, very different. Because Jesus says some really difficult and challenging things about happiness. He says things like, you will be happier if you give rather than receive. We read that in our Bibles, we think, must be a typo. And he says, again, another difficult thing, you will be happier if you serve rather than are served. He says you will be happier if you give in, if you sometimes let other people have your own way rather than always exert yourself, which is completely opposite to what the world says will make us happy. The world says that actually you want to put yourself first. It says you'll be happy if you've got more stuff rather than giving stuff away. It says you'll be happier if your partner serves you rather than you serve them. So Christians live a breathtakingly different story about happiness. Is the world's story about happiness working? It's a good question. But we don't just want to be happy, do we? We don't just say, well, as long as I'm happy, it doesn't really matter about anyone else. We want to live in a better world. We're desperately searching for a better world. That's why your Facebook, your Twitter, your Instagram feed, the news is on fire. Because people want a better world. People want a world without injustice. We want a world without bullying, without sexism, without racism. We want a world where people are not despised because of their looks or because of their education. We want a world where people don't go hungry. Now, there's extreme disagreement on how we get there and quite what that world looks like, and that's what politics is. But we want a better world. And so often the way the world deals with this is to say the problem is out there. But Jesus' story, and therefore the Christian story of how we get to a better world, is again breathtakingly different from all others. First of all, Jesus doesn't say it's okay. He doesn't say, don't worry about it, it's just one of those things. You know, occasionally men will kneel on other men's necks and they will die. He doesn't say, occasionally there will be extreme injustice, don't worry about it, it's not a problem. It's just one of those things that happens. Jesus, in fact, says it's worse than you think. He says that you're right to be angry, to be murderously angry about it. Jesus is so angry and distressed by injustice, abuse, manipulation and murder and oppression, all the things that hurt humanity. He's so angry about that because he loves us He says that someone's got to die, someone's got to pay, and someone's got to pay hard. And that's what's going on in America, isn't it? That's what the riots are about. People are saying, we have had enough. Someone needs to pay, and someone needs to pay hard. And we can understand that, can't we? We think, yeah, where there's injustice, where things are wrong, where it's not right, someone needs to pay, someone needs to pay hard. And then Jesus' story, the Jesus story, the different story, radically diverts from our culture story. Jesus says, yes, there's a huge problem and it's out there, but there's also a huge problem and it's in here. In your heart, in my heart, in our hearts. And it's not a matter, we can't sort it by education. We can't sort it by awareness. It's not a matter of trying harder. In fact, Jesus says you can't even see where to start. So we've got this huge problem. Because remember, we and Jesus think actually it's much worse than we think. We think it's awful. And we and Jesus say, someone's got to pay, someone's got to die. And Jesus then says, well, actually, you've got a problem. It's in your heart. There's racism, there's bigotry, there's murder and injustice in your heart. So we're left with this huge, huge problem because it's in us. And we say, well, someone's got to pay. And so Jesus says this. He says, because I love you, and since someone's got to die, I will die. And Jesus says, since someone's got to pay, I will pay. Though I'm innocent, I'll pay, and I'll pay hard. And you see, it's a radically different story. Jesus says the way to a better world is that he dies. He dies. And therefore, justice is served. Someone's got to die. Someone's got to pay. Jesus dies. A perfect man, slaughtered in my place, in your place, in the place of an imperfect, racist, bigoted, sexist, greedy, self-serving, aggressive, proud, power-hungry world. That's us, that's you, that's me. And so therefore we can forgive because justice has been done. It hasn't been ignored or fudged. It's just fallen on Jesus. The full weight of it has fallen on Jesus. And justice has been done for all the things done against us, done against any person. And it's also been done for all of the things done by us. So you can see that following Jesus, being a Christian, is living a radically different story. It's living a radically different story about everything, but it's living a radically different story about happiness and a better world. So back to our question, what is a Christian? A Christian who is someone who's living a different story and demonstrating that different story to the world. A different story about happiness. A different story about how we get to a better world. So I suppose if you're a Christian, the question's got to be, are we living that story? I'm going to pray and then we'll finish. Lord, I thank you for your story. I thank you that you invite us into that story because you love us and you want the best for us. You want us to find happiness and a better world in you. Lord, thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your love.